Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna open up our kit. You can see in the Happy Flower Stitchery Kit, all the product is in the kit that you need. So we're gonna take out our Subtle Tan. It's this really beautiful tone-on-tone fabric print. And then we're going to need our embroidery pattern right here. So what we're going to do, since we're just pulling this out, is we're actually going to iron it, because whenever you start to embroider, you want to have really nice crisp fabric. So we're going to go ahead and iron that. Okay, now we have our fabric ironed, so it's really nice and crisp, and we're going to take our embroidery pattern. Now, if you haven't used Adornit's embroidery patterns before, they are so easy to use. I absolutely love them. All of our embroidery patterns are printed onto a wash away stabilizer. So that means that you don't have to trace your pattern. You just simply peel the back off and stick it onto the fabric that you're stitching onto. Once you're done stitching, then you put it under water, and this pattern that it's printed onto actually dissolves and washes away. So all that's left is your beautiful hand stitching. So you can see it's not tacky, it's not stiff, it's just absolutely beautiful when it washes away. So all you have to do is you take your pattern and you simply peel off the back like this, and then this becomes garbage, so you throw that away, and you take your pattern and you apply that to the center of your fabric. So you can see I just simply rub that on. Now you don't have to iron it or do any further steps, you just simply peel and stick. How easy is that? Okay, so now you're going to want to get an embroidery hoop, and I'm using a 4-inch embroidery hoop. So to apply that, you just put the center ring, there's 2 different rings to an embroidery hoop. You take your center and you put that over the pattern. So you put the ring under, put your fabric over, and then you take this portion of the hoop, and usually you have to unscrew this to loosen your hoop if you've never used one before. And then you tighten that around the fabric that you're stitching. So you can see now how nice this is. Now you want it to kind of have a little bit of a bounce, because you want your fabric to stay really nice and tight. And so then you just simply take the screw to the embroidery hoop and you take it the other way and you tighten it right up so that your fabric doesn't move as you are stitching. So now I have that nice and tight, and I am ready to start stitching. Now, in this kit, we have all of our favorite Adornit Sulky thread. So we use a brand of thread called Sulky. And the reason why we use this is because it's a really nice premier brand of thread. It's a 12-way cotton floss thread, and they come on spools. So they're really simple to use because they don't get untangled and unwound in your bag of all your stitching stuff, and you don't have to pull apart skeins of thread. So that's why we absolutely love using Sulky. So I'm just going to pull these out of my kit. Okay, so here are my beautiful colors that we're going to be stitching with. All right, so now that we have our thread, I want to give you some tips as you are using your thread. Why I absolutely love this is that what you can do on the Sulky is this top actually will pop open. So you can pop this, and then your thread comes unwound from this. So that allows that when you're done, you can pop it back and keep your thread really nice and organized without this coming unwound in your bag. And so when you are doing your embroidery floss, this is a single strand, and a really great tip for the amount of thread that you're going to need is to take about your elbow length. So I just kind of unwind about that much, and I do a little bit longer than my elbow length, and then you simply just cut off the piece that you need. Then this is where I say then you pop this again and take the extra, wind it back around your hoop before you throw that back into your bag. So now I can close that, and I'm done using that. Now we're going to use a really nice sharp needle. When you are working with our Adornit patterns on this washaway stabilizer, you want to make sure you're using a really nice sharp embroidery needle. If you have a thicker embroidery needle, it's going to be harder for it to go through your pattern. So it's very important that you have a sharp needle. And so I am going to go ahead and I'm just going to thread my needle. And this is a single strand, so I just simply take it and put it right through the eye of my needle. And then I like to use what I call a double strand, because if I were just to simply use it this way, that would be a single strand, but I take my needle to the center of my cut thread. Okay, so I have pulled my needle to the center of my thread, and now I'm going to do a quilter's knot. And to do that, you take the end of your thread and you put it onto your forefinger, and you cross your needle over that thread like this. Then you're going to take and you're going to wrap it around about 2 to 3 times, and you hold it on that forefinger. Then you take and you pinch with your thumb and your forefinger, and then with your other hand that's free, you pull your needle out, and that creates the quilter's knot. So you have a nice knot down at the bottom. And then I will usually just trim it off because I don't like a long tail. I just like to kind of trim it so that I have a short tail as I do my very first stitch in my embroidery. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we are going to do our very first stitch, and this is called a woven spider wheel. And it's what we're doing is we're doing a woven rose. So you can see right here we have a woven rose right here, and then also one right here. So we're going to go ahead and we're doing this one. We're using the sulky color 0640 for this particular woven rose. Now what you're going to do is you are going to stitch right through this embroidery pattern, and you are going to stitch these lines right here. So you can see I'm just going up through the bottom, and then I'm doing a straight stitch right along those lines that are printed onto our pattern. Okay, now we're going to come up and we're going to go to the center of our wheel, and you're going to come up. Now what we're going to do is we're actually going to weave our way through these lines. So you're going to go over your first thread. So when I say threads, I'm talking about these straight stitches that we just made, okay? So we're going to take our needle over the first one and then under the second one. So you can say I'm going over and then under. So now the next thread, this one, I'm taking my thread over, and then I'm going to go under my next one, okay? So you're simply going over and under each different thread, and you're just going to keep doing the same thing as you weave right around. You're just going to want to go over and under. So you just remember that, over, under, okay? And we're just going to keep repeating that and go right along. Okay, so you can see I am almost to the end of my rose now. I have gone to the outer edges of the circle on my pattern, and you'll notice as I was going over and under that I didn't pull my thread tight. I left it very loose because these woven roses, you want them to have dimension and you want them to have like that 3D effect. So you don't pull them tight and you're not going down through the fabric. You're going just simply over and under the threads of the straight stitch. So as you get to the end, then you can see I'm just softly pulling through. And then once I am ready to be done, then all you have to do is take your needle and put it down, just poke right down through when you're done. And then we're going to tie a knot right here on the back side to finish off the woven flowers. Okay, I have threaded my needle with the next color, which is the sulky 0580. It's a beautiful kind of mint color. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to do another woven rose right to the other side. You can see right there I have this other woven rose. And again, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do our straight stitches right here along the line. We're going to come up, we're going to go through the center. So we're just going to do the exact same thing for this woven rose. It is a much larger woven rose, and so just remember to very loosely keep those threads going around so you have a nice dimensional rose as you're going along. So let's go ahead and do the next flower. Okay, you can see that I'm nearing the end of this cute woven rose, and you can see as I'm going along the edges, you want to make sure to fill outward, that you are not putting your thread too much on top to cross over, that you're really staying towards the outer side of your stitches. So you can see I have my needle and I'm really filling towards the outside, and I'm not putting my thread on top because I want to fill outward, if that makes sense. And what you can do is you just kind of keep going till you run out of thread, or you're, happy with your results. And then you just simply will tie it down. So I'm going to poke my needle down, flip my hoop over, and then I just tie a knot in that back. And I always find a thread on the back to loop through to tie my knots. And I always do 2 knots just because you want it to be secure so that nothing comes undone. And then just simply cut that off. I like to keep my tails really short so that I don't have a messy back side of my stitching. Now, the other fun thing you can do on your woven roses is you can actually kind of fluff them a little bit with your fingernails if you want to, and that will just kind of pull out those threads a little bit and make it a little bit even poofier. Is that a word? Poofier. So you can see that they are just absolutely darling to do your cute woven roses. So that is how you do a woven rose. Okay, now we are going to do a stitch that I absolutely love. Well, let's be honest, I love all the stitches, but this one is really fun because it is a lazy daisy chain stitch. And we are going to do the lazy daisy stitch right here for those cute leaves. And then we're also going to use that same stitch for these cute flower petals. So we're going to use them a couple different places to do this cute stitch. So let's go ahead and show you how to do that. I have threaded my needle now with the Sulky Thread 1815. This is one that I use all the time. It's one of my favorite colors, and I actually have the name memorized. It is called Japanese Fern. So to do this stitch, we're going to take these cute little petals right here, and we are simply going to, I have put a knot in the end of my thread, so I've done the quilter's knot, and we're just going to poke our needle right through the fabric, and you can see that I have my needle placed at the base of the leaf. So I'm going to pull my needle up through, and then you're going to do a loose loop like such. And I kind of keep my thumb on it to hold it into place. And then you come back down through that same, or close to that same hole that you came up through, okay? So, and I'm gonna keep this thread right here nice and loose, okay? So I just kind of, like I said, hold my thumb right there as I'm going and pull that through loosely. You can see I'm not pulling tightly, I'm just loosely pulling. Now, as I kind of get a big loop like that, then I take my needle and I'm going to come back through, and this time I'm going to poke my needle up through at the top of my leaf, my little petal. See that? So I have my needle coming right up there at the top of that leaf pattern. And now I'm going to pull loosely up through until that kind of tightens. Now I don't pull tight, I keep that a loose stitch like that. So if you were to pull tight, you would totally lose this stitch effect. Now I'm going to do a little tiny stitch over, so I am securing by going over that leaf, and I am securing that stitch right there. And there you have the lazy daisy stitch. Now we're just going to repeat that, and we're going to go up through our leaf pattern on this side. So let's go ahead and continue to do that. I'm going to walk you through it one more time so you can see how to do it again. So we're going to take our needle and come to the base of the leaf. We're going to pull it through. Remember, do not pull tight. Then we're going to hold our thumb over the thread so that we have a nice little loop. We're going to take our needle and go back down close to that same place where our needle came up through. Keep a nice loose thread right there. Don't let it get all tangled and knotted. And then you're going to take your needle and come up to the base, or excuse me, the top of that leaf. Pull it through till you have a nice loop right there. Do not pull tight. Now we're going to secure it by taking a tiny stitch over that thread to secure that stitch into place. And there we have it. Let's go ahead and finish out this leaf. Okay, so I am done with all my cute lazy daisy stitches right there. I have secured my top one, so now I'm just going to turn it onto the back side, and I'm going to secure it by giving it some good knots on the back side, and then I'm going to trim my thread. And voila, we have one side of our leaves done. Okay, now we're going to do the same stitch, the lazy daisy stitch, and we're going to do these cute flower petals. So we are going to use the 1303 of the Sulky. It's this beautiful coral color. And then we're also going to do the yellow, and we're going to use this golden color, which is 0567. So we're going to go ahead and do the lazy daisy stitch for the 2 pink flowers and then the 1 yellow. So once again, we're just going to go to the bottom of our leaf. We're going to loop it, hold it with our thumb, come back down that same stitch hole, and then take our needle to the top of the petal. Make sure that's in the center of your loop. Pull gently. and then you're going to secure that stitch by going over the top and coming back down the center. So we're going to go ahead and we're just going to repeat that for all these lazy daisy stitches. Okay, we have finished up our lazy daisy stitches. So we have our really cute leaves right here on the side. We've done the cute 2 pink flowers right there, and then this yellow golden flower. And there is also some floating leaves right here in the center that are green. So we have done our lazy daisy stitches. And I want to point out, as you transfer from color to color, it's important that you take a knot each color when you're done in a specific location. So like for instance, the pink, you can see I knotted it off, cut my thread, and then started again here. So that keeps the back of your embroidery hoop much tidier and nice and neat so that you don't have your threads getting caught around one another and having problems with tangling. So make sure as you switch between your colors that you knot it off and trim your thread. So, okay, well that is how we do the darling lazy daisy stitch. Okay, now we are going to do a French knot stitch. Now I love the French knot because it has a really great dimension depending on how many times you wrap it around the needle. So if you want a small French knot, you're just going to wrap it a few times, and if you want it to be a larger French knot, like you can see here on this stitchery there, a little bit, the texture of it, you can see, we wrap it around more times. So I'm going to show you specifically how we're going to do that. But you can see we do several different colors of French knots. We do them in the center of the flowers, we do them as cute little accents right there by the leaves, and then also we do the French knot right there in the center of that cute woven rose. So we're going to go ahead and show you how to do that. I have my needle threaded with the golden yellow color, and we're just going to go ahead and we're going to add our French knots right here in the center of this pink daisy. Now to do that, we have a knot at the end of our thread, and I'm going to go ahead and through one of the centers of these circles in my pattern, I'm going to bring my needle right up through. Okay, so I pull it to the end of the knot on the back side, and then I like to set mine down on my surface. And what you do is you hold this thread in your other hand. So you have one hand holding your needle and one hand holding your thread. And then you take at the end of your needle, you kind of loop it around like this, and you take and you wrap around the needle. Now this is where I was explaining you can make your knot small or large. So if you were to only wrap it around once, it would be a very small French knot. But I want these to have a little bit more dimension. So I'm actually going to wrap mine around 4 times. So I wrap it 4 times, and then you hold on to, oops, let me try and do this. So wrap it 4 times. It's a little bit trickier to do showing the camera. And then you hold it with your hand so that it's tight around the needle, and then you actually poke back down through the center of where you came up. Now you're holding on to this. It's very important. You hold on to that thread, and then with your other hand that's free, you're pulling down the needle, and you're actually just pulling that down, and that creates what's called a French knot onto your fabric. So let's go ahead and show you that again. So I'm not going to trim my thread or anything. I'm just going to keep it, since I'm doing this general section, I'm going to keep it all together. So you go through the center of your pattern right there, that little circle, and I'm going to hold it with this hand. I'm going to wrap it around 4 times, and then I'm putting my needle back down from where I came up, being careful to hold on to this thread while pulling with my other hand. Okay, and that is the French knot. So we'll do it again. Pull up, hold on to that thread, wrap it around. I'm doing 4 times, and then hold it with your hand, poke that back down, pull from the underside of your hoop straight through. And there you have the French knot. Now at this point, that's where I'm going to move to my next flower. And so this is where I am going to make sure I knot off my back. I'm not going to just jump to the other side. I'm going to take care and time and knot that off, trim it, and then I'm going to do a new quilter's knot so that I can start on the next section, which is over on the opposite side, and I'm just going to start. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change out my colors. I'm going to do my yellow to finish this off, and then you can see I'm going to take my mint color, the 0580, to do those cute little knots right there in the yellow daisy, and then I'm going to take the darker aqua color, which is the 640, and I'm going to do the little accent knots down here and in the center of my flower. So let's go ahead and do those. Okay, so I finished all my cute little accent stitches right there with the cute French knot. So now I'm going to go right up through the center of this woven rose and add this cluster of French knots. Now, what's fun about French knots is you can really fill a space with French knots. So you'll notice that inside that space we don't give any direction of how many knots. So that's really up to you how much you want to cluster those knots inside of there. I love filling spaces with French knots. It gives it a lot of really fun texture to your projects. Now, even if you want to add some French knots inside this other woven rose up here, you can do that too. So that would even be cute to do some yellow French knots inside that darker aqua woven rose. So that's what's fun about French knots, is just adding cute details and filling space, which gives a lot of fun texture. And that's why I love embroidery, is just the fun, all the fun different variances you can do with each of the stitches. And so I just have kind of gauged this by until I don't see the white fabric anymore. So I'm going to add one more stitch right here in the center. So I think I ended up doing about 5 to 6 different French knots. And again, I wrapped these several times, so they're bigger French knots. I've wrapped them 4 times around to do the larger French knot. So I am happy now with that cute little flower, and I'm just going to knot off the back like this, so that all my knots stay nice and pretty. And then I'm going to clip it. And voila, you know how to do a beautiful French knot now, and look how fun those add just little accent details to your project. Okay, I am going to show you how to do a back stitch. Now, a back stitch to me is the one stitch that if you need to know any stitch, it is the back stitch because it is the one that I use most frequently, and it is very simple, and I do think it just takes a little bit of practice as you get going. But what the back stitch is it's this happy right here. So it's how you can do your straight stitches, you can curve with a back stitch, so you can really do a lot with a back stitch. So we're going to go ahead and teach you how to do a back stitch by stitching this cute word happy. Now, a back stitch is just exactly what it is. You are stitching backwards. So on this happy, instead of starting at the first part of the line, you're actually going to go a stitch length into the pattern. Now, a stitch length is what you need to determine how small or how large you want your stitch length to be. Now, a good gauge, what I kind of do on my stitching pattern is this wash away stabilizer. If you look close at it, has a lot of little tiny dots. Now, that kind of helps me to gauge how I'm going to create my stitch length. So I kind of go by about 2 different dots on my stabilizer. It just kind of helps me keep my stitch length the same. So you can see here, I brought my needle up about a stitch length in. Now I'm going to take my needle backwards and go back down to the beginning of that artwork right there. So all you do is you just pull that through. Now you're not pulling tight, but you're having it so that it's nice and flush with your fabric. So to go to my next stitch, I'm going to go another stitch length forward. See that? And I come up. Now the secret here as you go is to go back down that same stitch hole that you came up. So that's what's going to keep your stitches really nice and tight and look really, I guess, could you say the word professional? I think you could. So you want to make sure that you're coming up and down those same stitch holes, because I have had people be like, I stitched mine and it looks like a kindergartner stitched it. And all my critique is for that is, you know what? You have to make sure that you're coming back up and down the same stitch hole, and you will be able to avoid having it look like a little child did it. And the second thing is to make sure that your stitch lengths are as much as possible the same. And why I say that is because you don't want a bunch of little tiny stitches and a bunch of long stitches, because that once again is what would make it look like a kindergartner has stitched your project. So as long as you can remember those 2 main things as you are doing your back stitch, then you will have a beautiful embroidery. And like I said, that's why you want to practice, is because it does take some practice to be able to know how to keep your stitch lengths, the same. And there isn't a good or bad to whether you do your stitch lengths longer or shorter. It's really just preference. I like to do mine a nice medium size because it doesn't take quite so long. And if you do them too long, then it's harder to do curves. So if you just do a nice medium stitch length, which is what I said is about 2 of these little dots in my stabilizer, then that gets me a really nice stitch length. So, okay, so let's go ahead and we're gonna do now the A, and you can see there's some curves to the A, right? So once again, we're going to bring our needle up a stitch length, and then I'm going to pull it through and take it back down to the starting point. Now to do the curve, I don't have a long stitch length, you can see, so I'll be able to do my curves nicely. So I'm coming up a stitch length, pulling my needle through, and then going back down that previous stitch hole. So there we go. By keeping a nice even stitch length, I'm able to do a curve and have it look really nice. And you just keep on going. So back stitches are really simple. And to me, once you get your practice and you've got the rhythm down, it's really nice and relaxing because you don't really have to think about it. You don't have to make sure you have your fingers in a certain spot, or like a French knot or any of those lazy daisy stitches. This is just much more relaxing of a stitch, I think. So, Okay, so we're just gonna keep on going and we're gonna stitch this happy. I'm keeping my same stitch lengths and we're just gonna go for it and finish this off. Okay, that is how we do a back stitch. So you can see how easy and relaxing and fun the back stitch is. And that, like I said, is one that I use the most often on all my embroidery projects. So that's one that you're really going to want to practice and master. Okay, we are going to learn how to do a stem stitch. Now this is probably one of my second favorite stitches because it is something you can do with curves, you can do it straight, but because it's kind of a woven stitch, then it allows to have like kind of a raised texture. So it's one that I tend to use quite a bit, and sometimes I replace it in lieu of a back stitch. So to do a stem stitch is what we're going to do right here for the finishing aspect of this leaf. Now we could have done a back stitch and it would have looked just as beautiful, but I really want to teach you how to do a stem stitch. So to do a stem stitch, you're going to bring your needle up at one of the ends of your artwork pieces. So I'm going to start right here on the left. I am a righty, so for me it's always easiest on this particular stitch to start at the left. So I'm going to bring my needle up through, and this is one that you're going to need your thumb to help hold in place. So you start your stem stitch by coming up there, then you're going to take it a stitch forward, and I kind of give it a generous amount. I don't keep it too tight, because what you're going to do is you're going to bring your needle back up through the center. So I would kind of say maybe go 2 stitch lengths forward, okay? So I have my needle and I am about 2 stitches forward. I'm going to take my needle down, but I'm not going to keep it tight. So you can see I'm kind of keeping a loop there. Now this is where you only do this to begin with, and now I'm going to come back up to the center of that stitch length. So you can see that's where I went down, that's where I came up, and I'm bringing my needle back up through the center, okay? Now you can pull your thread tight. So now I'm going to keep always my thread going the same direction. So I'm always going to keep my thread going upward. You don't want to keep your thread going downward. So I always use my thumb to just kind of keep that in place. So now you're going to go a stitch length forward, and then you're going to bring your needle up through the last stitch hole. So right here, I am bringing it forward. So you can see right there, okay? And then I pull it tight. So it kind of gives it a rope-like effect as you're stitching. So once again now, I'm going to go down, and then I'm going to come back up through the last stitch hole. So just like that. And like I said, you always keep your thread above. Okay, so you always keep it on top and bring it down, and then you come back up. Just like this, and it creates a really fun stitch. So down, and then come right back up. It's important to come back up as close as you can to that last stitch hole. And we're almost done. Back up and down. Back up through your stitch hole, and we're almost done. So I go down at the bottom, I'm ending at the bottom of that lazy daisy stitch. I'm coming back up through that last stitch hole. Now to finish it off, I pull it, and then I simply go to the middle of that last stitch hole, and I poke my needle down through to give it one more rope-like effect right there, to kind of give it that twisty effect. And then I am done. I flip it over to the back side and I knot it off. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to do the other side of the leaf But I want to show you again how to start and stop, because I think it's really important to show you how to start and stop. So I'm going to quickly thread my needle because I'm almost out of thread, and we'll go ahead and start again on that one. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through again how to do the stem stitch, because I feel like sometimes it's kind of confusing how to get started. So once again, my preference is to start at the left side and go to the right, but that's a preference. So if you maybe are a lefty, you might want to start at the right side. So I am going to start this time at the bottom of this lazy daisy stitch. So I am going to bring my needle up, and then remember, I'm going to go about 2 stitch lengths forward, and I'm using my thumb to hold that loop, that thread in place up above. So I'm going about 2 stitch lengths forward, and then I am bringing my needle halfway through. Remember, this is only when you begin the stem stitch. You don't have to do this portion only at the beginning, okay? So you can see I'm holding that, and now I'm bringing my needle up to the center right there. So you can see I went up here, went down there, and now I'm bringing my needle up through the center right there to begin the stem stitch. Okay, now again, I'm going to use my thumb to hold that thread in place so that I don't lose where it's supposed to be. And then you're coming up and back down through that same stitch hole. Okay, so then you take it forward or to the above. And the reason why you want to keep it the same is because that's how it's going to create your rope-like effect, is by always having that thread go above. So that's why it's important to keep it above, so that you can keep it going the same direction and have it look the same as you are going. So once again, I'm just going forward now a stitch length, and then coming back up my previous stitch hole and keeping that thread going to the top. And I'm almost to the end. One more right here, and I am done. So now again, to end it, I bring it forward. Okay, now to end it, I'm just going to do a little tiny half tuck right there, and then I am going to knot it off on the back. And my friends, that is how you create a stem stitch. Okay, I am going to teach you how to do a satin stitch. Now, a satin stitch is where you're stitching really close together. So you're putting your stitches side by side. So that's how we're going to do these little triangle leaves right off the side of that woven rose. Okay, so this is a really simple and easy stitch to do. All we're going to do is we're just going to follow our lines right here. So we're going to come up and then go backward or forward. It doesn't really matter with a satin stitch. I am choosing to go backwards. And I'm just going side by side so that my thread is right by each other. Satin stitches are also referred to as a fill stitch, because when you're doing this stitch, you are filling the area with the thread. So you're basically coloring in the area with your thread. So sometimes if you're doing a large area, the satin stitch can take a lot of thread. But you can see this is just a little tiny triangle area that we're doing. So it's not going to take too much. And I'm just following right along my pattern right here for my longer and shorter stitch lengths, so that it's really simple and easy to follow along. And I'm just going to end it right there. Now this is the point where we're using the same thread, but I don't like a bunch of loose threads all over the back side. So this is where now I take it over, flip it over, and I like to create knots on each different area. And then I like to clip my thread and then do another quilter's knot to start again. And then I'm going to start my next leaf. And the reason why I like to do that is it just keeps the back of my hoop a lot tidier and a lot less knots and things like that, that as you're kind of moving along, you don't get tangled on the back side. So that's my little tip to you, is try and cut your thread, knot it off, between each different area if you're moving to a large space like I was. So that's my little tip, is to do that. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to keep putting my stitches side by side to create the satin stitch, also known as a fill stitch. So you can see I'm just keeping them really nice and close and tight to each other to fill this area of this cute little leaf pattern. And then I just follow my stitch length as I go right here. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to finish off this next one. Okay, I have finished my cute little leaves on my embroidery using the satin stitch, also known as the fill stitch, and doesn't that look cute? Okay, so now we're going to do a running stitch, which is a larger stitch length, and you're actually going forward as you stitch, but just like the back stitch, you want to keep your stitch length as much as possible the same length. So on this one, I am doing quite a large stitch length, and you can see that there is space in between. So I just bring my needle up and then back down for my stitch length, and then you're giving it some space as you do the running stitch. So this is actually probably a really quick and easy fast stitch as you're going right along. And you just, the only trick to this one is try to keep your stitch length as much the same length as possible. Okay, we're ending the end of our running stitch, and I'm just going to pull up this last stitch, put it back down, and then I'm going to turn my hoop over and put a knot. So I basically ended and began in the same place for this running stitch, and I am completed. So running stitches are really fun for cute borders and little detail areas that you want to put that fun, loose, long stitch with some air around it. So that is how you do a running stitch. Okay, so we're going to take this out of the hoop, and we are now going to put it under water and dissolve away that pattern that we stitched over. So all you have to do is put it under lukewarm water, and you're going to kind of let it saturate. And then sometimes even I'll fill my sink and kind of let it saturate and really kind of let it start to dissolve the pattern away. So you'll be able to see that this will actually start to disintegrate and your pattern's just going to dissolve completely away. All right, so you can see how my pattern, I've just kind of let that water run on it and I've let it kind of soak away. Now, you want to make sure that you completely rinse this really well so that you don't have any leftover pattern on there, okay? Because if you were to dry it, then it just creates problems if you leave a little bit of pattern on there. So make sure that you really soak it well. And sometimes what I like to do if I notice there's some stubborn areas is I'll kind of fold my fabric in and softly just kind of gently rub it back and forth to help pick up any extra pieces that might be on there. You don't want to rub too hard and unpick stitches. But the other thing that if you have some stubborn areas, like maybe where you have a lot of stitching, say for instance on the woven roses or maybe up in some of the lazy daisy stitches, is I'll just take like a soft bristle toothbrush, which is actually what I would probably do right in here because I have some stubborn spots right here inside my lazy daisy stitches. And I would just take a soft brush toothbrush, so you know, have one just for your stitching, and just gently rub it in those dense areas that maybe they're being a little bit stubborn. and then that will lift that pattern right off. And once you rub it, then put it back under. You can even kind of rub it while you have water running, and that will just help pick up any of those little stubborn areas. But really, this should just dissolve right off once you run it under that lukewarm water and come right off it. And then you're just going to lay your pattern out to air dry on your counter. Ready? Is that camera on now?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Okay, now that we are done with our embroidery portion of this cute little project, we are going to go ahead and start assembling this cute little block. So now what we're going to do is we're going to get the fabric out of our kit, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to cut 4 different squares, 2 out of each different pattern, and we're going to cut them 8 by 8 inches. So I'm just going to get out my cutting tools, a nice rotary cutter and a nice ruler, and I'm going to trim these both down to 8 by 8 inches. Okay, so you're going to have some scraps, so just go ahead and put those in your scrap bin, and you can use those for a fun other project. And now what we're going to do is we're going to piece these together into the square. So you can see that you're going to put your stripes opposite of each other and this cute floral print opposite of each other as well. So I'm just going to lay that out on my workspace so that I can visually see where each of my patterns are going to go. And then I'm just going to take it over to my sewing machine, and using a 1/4 inch foot, I'm just going to go ahead and do a 1/4 inch seam. So I place my flower side and my jumbo stripe right sides together, and I'm going to sew down the right hand side of that fabric. I'm going to take that off the machine, and I'm going to do it to the second block. Same thing. Line it up and take it to the machine. Okay, it's very important as you sew that you always iron as you go. Pressing as you go makes your projects turn out so much nicer. So I just have this pressing board, so I'm just going to quick grab my iron, and I'm going to press those seams. And then I like to open it up and press them opposite directions. So I'm going to have this seam go the right way to the right side, and then I'm going to have this seam, let's see, I'm going to open it up so I make sure my seam goes correct. I'm going to press this one to the left side like this. I'm just going to press that so that they're nice and crisp and flat. Okay, and then now I am going to get out some pins, some sewing pins. And I am going to make sure that my cross points right here in the center match up. So I'm just going to flip this so that they're right sides together. And I am going to pin right there in the center so that as I'm sewing, that those don't budge and move around, because I want them to come out nice and crisp. And so I'm just going to put a few pins in here so that my fabric doesn't slip. Okay, and once I have it pinned, now I'm going to take it back to my machine, and I'm going to do a 1/4 inch seam to put both of those together. take it out and we'll take out our pins. Once again, I like to get my iron out and I like to just press that. And then let's open it up and see if I did okay. Ooh, perfect. Look at that. So the seam right there in the center came out just perfect. I love it when that happens. Okay, so now I have this darling 4-patch. So let me lift it up and show you. Okay, so that's going to be the base of our cute little happy flower wrap that we have. Okay, so now we're going to do our cute little dimensional daisy petals that we have right here around the edge. Now to do that, we're going to take our yellow strip of fabric and we're going to, let's see, I need to get my ironing mat again. I put it away too soon. Okay, so we're going to put it onto our ironing mat and we're going to press it in half, right sides together. Okay, so we're going to press it right in half like this. So that means my right sides are facing inward. Okay, now I'm going to take my template for my petal and a quilting marker. So this is a wash away fabric pen. So if you have a fabric pencil, any of those that wash away, then that's what you're going to use, and you're just going to trace your petal onto your fabric. Now you'll notice that I'm putting the edge, the straight edge, onto the open side of my fabric because we're going to have to flip these out. So we're just going to trace our petals right on here, all the way across. You're going to need 7 petals, okay? So you're going to want to do this for 7 different petals on your yellow fabric. Okay, once you have them all traced just like that, then we're actually going to take this to our sewing machine. Now, if you are a beginner, I would recommend that you put some pins in here so that your fabric doesn't slip around as you are taking it to the machine, because what we're actually going to do is we're going to draw and follow this line with our sewing machine. So you'll see that I'm going to pin this and then I'm going to bring it right over here to my sewing machine, and I'm going to follow directly on top of that line that I traced. So I just put this in my machine, and then as close as I can, I'm just going to basically draw with my sewing machine onto that line. And as you kind of hit your corners, you're just going to turn with your corners and trace around there. If you don't have it perfect, it's okay, because mistakes can happen with this one. So you can see here that I have sewn right on top of that line. So you're going to go ahead and you're going to do that for each different daisy petal. Once you've done that, then you're going to get out your fabric scissors and you're going to trim your petals. And I just do about an 1/8 inch to a 1/4 inch away from that stitch line. So you can see I'm just kind of freehanding it and following and cutting that out just like that. Okay, so then what you're going to do is you are going to flip this and turn it, and then once again you're going to need your iron and your ironing mat, and I just like to turn it as good as I can to press that with my fingers, and then I get out my ironing mat and my iron, and I just press those so that it looks nice like that. Okay, so you're going to do that for all of your daisy petals. So you're going to turn each and every one of them, and then you're going to iron them. Next, you're going to need to get out your needle and your thread, and I just used my embroidery floss that came in my kit that I used for my hand embroidery, and the same needle. And what I've done is I just have a single thread, so I'm not doubling it. I'm just doing a single. And I'm going to thread my needle. So I'm just going to sew just like this, okay? So I have a knot in this end, and then it's just a single strand, and I'm going to do a gather stitch. So that means it's like a running stitch, which we have learned with our embroidery stitches, where you just do a really long length of stitch, because that is how we can gather the fabric, is with this running stitch. So I'm just doing a quick, I'm probably going to end up doing about 4 lengths down this cute little daisy petal. And then it's really simple to gather. You just pull that thread and you can see how my daisy petal gathers. And then I just run my needle through the layer to add a little bit of a knot to keep my daisy gathered, just like that. So you're going to repeat this step for each of your daisy petals. So you can see here I have my daisy petals ready, just like that. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and we are going to start cutting our embroidery and go to the next step. Okay, now that we have our, or I shouldn't start with that, okay. Now that we have our cute little daisy petals done, we're going to pull out our felt that comes in the kit. And what we're going to do is we're going to kind of decide what we want for our embroidery size of our little hoop here. So I think what is nice about your 4-inch embroidery hoop is that it gives you in the center ring, you know, that middle part of your embroidery hoop, it gives you a guide so that you know exactly where to cut. Isn't that convenient? So we're going to take that portion and I'm going to, as you can see right here, I am going to center it. Let me flip it around so the camera can see that better. I am actually going to center that right there, and I'm going to trace with my wash away marker, and I'm going to hope that I got it the way I want it. Oh, I think that looks pretty darn good. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing on my felt right here. I'm going to trace this because this felt is actually going to be the base of our daisy. So it's important that we have our felt on there. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut out this embroidery pattern using my fabric scissors. And I'm going to follow along on my line as close as I can. So you're just cutting the circle around your cute little embroidery. Didn't this turn out so fun? I love the colors. The colors just make me so happy. Okay, so I have that cut out. So I have that piece. And then now we're going to take and we're going to use this felt piece as our base. So I'm going to take my daisy petals and I am going to line them up. I'm going to put this right here so you can see how this is going to look. So I'm going to line them right along my circle here. And I'm just right now, I'm just kind of placing them because I want to see my spacing and see how all that's going to look. Okay. So I have 3, 6, 7, I did 7 daisy petals. And then I'm going to use this as my other guide because I'm like, okay, do I want them to be a little bit closer? So I'm going to scoop my little daisy petals in pretty darn close. So they're almost touching. Well, they are touching. They're kind of overlapping actually. And then I just kind of smush them down the way I like them. And I'm going to lay this over and be like, yeah, I like that. Just like that. Now what I'm going to do is and see, since we traced that circle onto our felt, that is a good guide so that we can keep the circular portion of our cute little daisy petals. So I just kind of eyeball it and until I'm happy. And then it's very important that you're going to use some pins and pin these daisy petals onto your felt, okay? So So I'm pinning these down onto my felt. Just like that. Okay, now that I have all my daisy petals exactly where I want them, now we're going to take it back over to the sewing machine to secure those petals into place. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to tack each of the petals down. So I'm going to move it over to the sewing machine, and I'm just going to sew on those inside gather seams and tack them into place because I want my petals to stay dimensional. So I'm not sewing on top of my petals. Just down in the bottom section, I'm just sewing right around them so they stay in place. And I actually like to go back over my lines again so I make sure that they are right intact. So once you have it kind of placed down, then it's a little bit easier once you do your first seam to go back over and just go back over it one more time to make sure they're exactly where you want them. I'm going to pull that out of my machine and cut my thread. And go ahead and pull out those needles, or excuse me, those pins. Okay, so now I have the base of my cute little flower right here. Now I am going to take and I'm going to trim away this excess felt. So all you have to do is kind of lift up because you don't want to cut your daisy petals, and I'm just going to go in and give it a good haircut and trim around. And I guess you could, if you wanted, you could follow that trace line that you have already on there, and that would give you a good place to follow. So you can see there now I have my cute little daisy put into place. Okay, now this next part is very important, and what you want to do is you want to place your daisy right in the center of your 4-patch block, okay? So we're going to go ahead and put that little daisy right there in the center. And then now what we're going to do is we're going to take our embroidery piece and we are going to tack that down. Now if you don't like how wide this is, because remember I used the inside of my cute little hoop right here, which I think it's a little bit too wide, so I'm actually going to trim mine down a little bit. I am going to carefully trim about 1/4 inch from those running stitch embroidery lines because I just want it just a little bit closer. So I'm going to trim mine down. Now it would have a really fun like ruffle if you were to keep it the width that I had it. It would still look darling. So really it's just your preference of what you want to do on your cute little embroidery project. Okay, so I trimmed mine down and now I'm going to place that in the center of my daisy. And now I am going to add a lot of pins onto this so that I don't mess this portion up because I don't want my daisy to move around, because this is now how we're going to do our final assembly of our cute little daisy. Okay, and I'm also going to add pins right out here on my outer daisies because I really want them to stay in place. Okay, I have my cute little daisy in place. I'm happy with the placement, so it's time now to take it to the machine and do the final stitch. What we're going to do is we are going to stitch right in the center of the edge of the fabric and that 1/4 inch running stitch. Okay, so we're just going to take it to the machine and do the final placement on our sewing machine. Okay, I am done. So if you notice, I took it really nice and slow because I didn't want to mess up and I didn't want to have too many puckers and too many gathers. Now, if you like to do a turn under applique, you probably could turn under that circle and have it look just absolutely gorgeous. But I personally love the raw out applique. I love my edges to fray and create that really fun texture on my projects. So you'll notice that I left my edges as a raw out, and then as over time, or I can kind of pick it, those are going to fray out and have a really fun texture from where I stitched them. And like I said earlier, if you were to have kept this extra on there, then you would have even more of a frayed edge, which would look really cool. So this technique of how you apply your flower is really up to you, the preference of how you want your finished flower to look. But now I have my flower assembled onto my cute fabric. So now the fun part, we get to finish off our cute little wrap. And I call this like a gallery wrap because that's what it reminds me of. Now what I have found is easiest to do is your kit comes with a backing cardboard, and there's a reason why we kept it on there. And that's because it's going to help us keep this really nice and stable. And so what you're going to do is just grab some paper, scissors, and a pen and just trace off your square. And then you're going to trim off your cardboard, okay? So now we're switching. We've done a lot of fun techniques. We've done our hand embroidery, and then now we have done some piecing with our fabric and our sewing machine, and now we're doing a little bit of crafting. So isn't this a fun project that you really get to mix all those three fun different crafts? So now I like to have my cardboard on there. You could glue this down if you wanted, or you could use a staple gun if you want to keep it secure. I'm just going to go ahead and lay my fabric down right on top. So the cardboard just helps create a nice surface so that your fabric doesn't slump inside that frame, okay? So you're just going to take and you're going to eyeball it and say, okay, do I like the placement of my cute little flower? Like this. And then you're going to hold on to your sides and you're going to flip it over so that your flower is now facing your work surface, okay? So now you're going to take and you're going to need to go to your husband's tool supplies. You're going to need to get a stapler, an industrial stapler. Okay, so you're going to take your industrial stapler, and what you're going to do is you're just going to tack on your different edges of your fabric. So I'm just going to put a staple right here. Okay, and then you're just going to staple the other side as well. Okay, so now we're going to show you how to do these nice mitered corners on your gallery wrap. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your fabric, because we've stapled down the sides, and you're going to take this piece and you're going to fold it over your gallery wrap to the inside. And then you're going to hold it down with your fingers, and you're going to kind of loosen it until you like the miter of that corner. So you're just going to kind of fold it with your fingers until you like the way that that looks on your fabric. So does that make sense? So let me show you again. So you're going to take this fabric and fold it to the inside of your frame. Then you're going to take this folded edge and fold it over to the back, and then adjust it to the corner of your preference. So see how that is? And I love it right there. So I'm going to take now and I'm going to hold that with my fingers, and I'm going to get my staple gun, and I'm going to staple right there. And then we're going to do it again on the same way to do the miter corner for the other edge. And voila, you are done with your darling gallery wrap of your happy embroidery. It was so much fun to take all the different craft mediums to be able to make such a fun project. All right, I have one other tip. So if you don't have an industrial stapler, you know what? I just tried it and my regular old home stapler worked just as great. So I was able to put that in and staple to finish off the edges of that. So there's a little tip for you. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me today, making this darling little happy flower shelf sitter with the gallery wrap. It was so fun to do the embroidery and the piecing and the crafting to create such a fun project. So don't forget to go over to our website, adornit.com, to see more wonderful products. Thank you so much for joining me today.